will begin in 3, 2, 1. I don't know if interviewing is an art, a science, or a craft.
There are so many people who do this for a living, and there are so many people who do this poorly, that a lot of people enter this situation of an interview defensive, or they see it as an opportunity to just sell a product. And I feel my job is to get in between those two.
Drop the news. Hit it. Open, Ray.
Topic design beforehand is almost as important as what you're doing in the studio once the show has left the dock and is on its way to somewhere.
Be prepared.
This is Weekend Edition. I'm Scott Simon. When the Carnegie Commission on Adolescent Development issued its report, it seemed to affirm another bleak assessment of our nation's young people. The report laid much of the blame for this on adult disengagement from adolescents. But several people who study this age group closely have taken issue with those assessments. One of them is Mike Males, who's been studying adolescents for several years now. If you're going to interview somebody, you owe the audience, them, and for that matter yourself, the courtesy of trying to prepare for it, at least to the extent of trying to fathom in your own mind what you're going to ask and why you're doing the interview at all.
My goal in this case was to get him to talk. Rost is in a very interesting position right now. He is an adolescent. He's a phenom, as we say, a phenomenon, a prodigy. So he is bound to be difficult, perhaps, in some respects. I didn't know whether to expect a prima donna.
A legend.
A legend?
A legend. Someone for many years, many centuries will still talk about me.
Really?
Yeah. Story.
Or someone who's so used to having the attention that he's got pat answers down.
I don't know the people who come into my studio. The first time I've laid eyes on most of them is when they come in that few minutes before the show. They sit down, they do a mic check. I have to think about gaining their trust, that I'm someone who has done a little bit of homework, so I'm ready to ask them thoughtful questions about what they came to talk about. It is a journalistic tendency to be suspicious. Call it a trait of the trade. I've met a lot of kids since becoming a parent, and a remarkable number, I've been told, have attention deficit disorder. Many of them take a drug, methylphenidate, trade name Ritalin, to function more effectively at school and home. Am I doubting the existence of attention deficit disorder? Not at all. Am I questioning its use as a voguish diagnosis for all the perceived shortcomings of our children? You bet. Find out what you can about the world that they inhabit, and then to try and concoct questions ahead of time that might conceivably be interesting.
And how can I put those questions in such a way that it would work as a conversation? Think about conversations that you have with people.
Now, triple tour would be what, three
revolutions in the air.
Uh-huh. And land on both feet.
Exactly.
Gracefully.
Gracefully. With a smile.
With a smile. What was the other one?
Triple soda basque. It's the same, but instead of standing and doing, you run and you jump and you do it.
And you have to turn
and
three
you turn
times.
3 times in the air.
My goodness.
And pirouettes, which is where one foot's on the floor and you just keep spinning like ice skaters.
Mm-hmm. How many can you do?
I just did my maximum yesterday at a friend's house. I did 10.
Ah.
I always feel better if I have a sheet of questions in front of me, mostly for those occasions when I really don't know what to ask and I have to look down to figure out something, or more likely I just feel better having it in front of me because I have the sensation that I won't be stuck.
I write out all my questions and that I want to ask. I write it out in hand, in longhand. It's a memory jog for me, and I was able to put them up on the music stand, so they were there, but it's only as a backup.
And you know an interview is going best when you maybe look at those things as you enter the studio but don't really refer to them until the end.
Absorb the material, brainstorm the material, and then organize the material, and then go in there and be willing to throw it all out the window.
With me here in Washington is Peter Jensen, Director of the Child and Adolescent Disorders Research Branch at the National Institutes for Mental Health. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ray.
The first question is exposition. You can't make it one of those how many angels can dance on the head of a pin sort of question. Dr. Jensen, if I were to pick up my clinical handbook or my reference work on disorders, what would it say about ADD? What is it?
Well, ADD is
Mr.
as
Mail,
you
thanks for being
described
with
in
us.
your
Thank you.
And just briefly, where does this report fall short in your estimation?
Well, I think the Carnegie Report...
What's the question that's going to break the ice?
Rasta Kuzma Ramachandra.
Rasta? What kind of name is Rasta?
My parents, I don't know what made them decide to choose that name, but I think it's pretty cool.
The first question can dictate really the entire experience.
It can't be the question that makes the guest defensive. It can't be the adversarial, aggressive, let me shoot this guy in the knees question.
If people are offended by the first question, and sometimes God knows that's necessary, that's definitely going to color the rest of the relationship you have on the air.
The big difference between doing an interview as a host of a program and doing an interview as a reporter. As a host, I have to assume that everything I say is going to be broadcast. So what I try to do is ask precise questions. Reporters usually prepare their pieces so that their questions are going to be edited out, which is why you will find that reporters that do this job as a host sometimes, until they learn, badger. Well, you answer my question, answer my question, answer my question, answer my question, and you can take the tape back, cut out yourself saying, answer my question 5 times, and just leave the answer. Whereas the way that our interviews are broadcast, it is a conversation.
You ask people questions that allow them to show their stuff. Are there also commonalities there so that we can say, aha, look at this thing that ADD sufferers have in common?
Yes, there is no evidence with some of the new tools that there are differences in the way that brains of these children and adults function. However, the tools and the techniques are really exploratory at this point.
The behavior of adults
Some
around them,
involve
all of these are
exposure
very
time.
influential in the way adolescents behave.
You have a couple of statistics, for example, that you cite about ways in which, to put it delicately, adults influence youngsters.
Well, we'll start out with an indelicate one. The Carnegie Report spends pages and pages on sexuality.
It's good to get somebody talking, to realize that their conversation is being listened to.
One thing I do pretty frequently is to ask a fairly open-ended question to get things rolling.
What do you love about ballet?
What do I love about ballet? Well, it's probably what I love about dance and physical activities. It's a form of expression.
You let them inside a little bit, they let you inside a little bit. There's more of a mutual relationship, so that by the time you have to ask tough questions, and you should, they're closer to you, they're more likely to try and want to give you answers. Do you think people are getting afraid of their children?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a very disturbing...
That's why you save your best questions usually for the middle, because by then they're warmed up sufficiently.
Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? What do you see yourself doing?
10 years from now.
Yeah.
It's a technique question. It's a question that I will ask anyone in that situation. And it was a question, frankly, that had been given to me by Noah Adams 20 years ago as a good question to always ask. So.
Nothing will kill an interview more quickly than somebody who gets the idea you're not listening to.
It's not about how much I know. It's about how much the other person is willing to reveal. I wanted him to feel that he was the most important person in the room to me, and he was. I looked for something that we had in common, anything that we had in common, to try and establish that relationship before we got into the studio. Handshake, straight in the eye, I'm really pleased you're here to talk to me. Then we talked about my tooth. I had a tooth out, and he said he had just had dental work, and it turns out it was on the same side of his mouth as it is on mine. So we became sort of partners in pain. But it relaxed him.
There's a reason that the guest is there. So you first have to give them at least the respect of allowing them to say, here's my understanding of this universe.
That turns up in the histories of many teenagers that wind up pregnant.
Mm-hmm. So you see a lot of destructive adolescent behavior as stemming absolutely directly from adults.
Well, some of it's directly from adult behavior. Some of it's a result
Adult
of
misbehavior, I should say.
Well,
really.
adult misbehavior, I think you'd have to say.
It puts the interview subject in a comfortable place. Then you take over, and then you say, well, let me put a different way of looking at it into play. How about if we define this universe this way?
You know, Mr. Males, not being a parent myself, I maybe don't feel the same sense of urgency about this, but as I say, a lot of my best friends are parents, and it seems to me that a lot of them feel that they really have no control over their teenagers' lives past a certain point.
Or, from a lot of the reading I've done, there are many people who disagree with you, and this is what they say. John Marrow's in New York. John, is all this, as far as you're concerned, boilerplate, established medicine, or would you take exception to some of the things that Dr. Jensen said?
Well, like you, Ray, I'm a journalist and sort of trained to ask questions. And I think it's important to note that there really is no medical test for ADD. The diagnosis is really quite subjective.
You've got to let them handle their critics.
Well, I think these are important concerns, but we do better than that, actually. I think our research techniques have really taken us a step further. For example,
you've got to force them to handle their critics.
You know, this is a very slippery slope to go down with any child.
Do you agree with that, Peter Jensen?
Well, I think Mr. Marrow's skepticism is healthy and appropriate.
Well, you want to ask them questions that don't have off-the-top-of-the-head answers. Sure you do. Is that worrisome to you as well, that we keep these kids medicated in order to keep them our version of functional? But you don't necessarily want to trip them.
A lot of the interviewing we see here in the United States are interviews for sound bites. It's like an attack dog. You're not really interested in anybody's opinion so much as you're interested in getting them to commit some kind of verbal indiscretion.
It's made our frequent interview subjects defensive, and it's made them lie.
If you fling something in their face with the worst possible interpretation, you have to be aware of the fact that you're giving them the option to step out of that.
That way you're not presenting your audience with the truth, and all you're doing is showing them something about you.
What makes the kind of broadcasting we do different is that we're trying to put a context into it and lend a certain texture. We're trying to introduce people in their whole sense.
Remember always that people are experts on their lives. So ask them to talk about their life and themselves. Could you contrast briefly what you used to be like with what you're like now so I can understand this? I mean, achievement's one of those sort of blurry bump words that covers a lot of ground, but doesn't...
Okay. I find functioning now is what it's like for the normal individual, so to speak. Previously, it was like trying to function when you're in a state just shy of staggering drunk.
You want people to give you color. You want people to give you detail.
The power of silence. If you ask a question and they don't answer it right away, the worst thing you can do is leap in and try to explain your question. If you stay quiet...
You see, I am not interested in making money out of these things.
Politicians have learned not to, but most people will leap into that silence just to fill the void.
I think we make a mistake in thinking, however, that a non-answer is not interesting. Sometimes somebody's evasions are more interesting than an actual answer.
For me, the rule of thumb is 3 times. If you have to ask the same question 3 times to try and get an answer, usually by that time, they're not going to give you the answer.
When you're interviewing a public servant or a politician, it's not uncommon that there is one thing they're going to say in the interview, whether you ask it or not. And the hell of it is, until you give them a chance to say it, they will not answer any other question. You have to divine that, you have to figure that out and give them the opportunity to say that. Then they don't have anything else, and they kind of have to handle your questions.
You don't want to ask a question that just says yes, no. If you can follow up with, really, or...
Such as?
Or...
Talk a little bit about that.
You'll usually get much more of an answer.
If I was going to be interviewing the President of the United States today, I might dress something like this, which is to say, casually, a little bit casually. Because somebody who's interviewed a lot, somebody who's formal,